All right, cool.
Nice.
All right, let's jump into it. So today we are going to talk through how to blend attribution data post iOS 14, and now there's 15 and 16, 17, 18, 20. I'm sure there's a ton coming after that. And again, if you can post in your chat what it would be in wins for you. I saw a couple come through there. There is also a Q&A section. So if you do have any questions that aren't urgent, feel free to drop those into the Q&A in the Zoom setting there. And we'll try to pause between sections just to answer any questions that we can jump into. And again, if you are just jumping on, we are going to leave 15 to 20 minutes at the end. We'll probably end up being like an hour, probably won't go the full 90 minutes, but we are going to leave a significant amount of time for Q&A, and we can bring you on as well to ask any questions. So you don't need to turn your video on, even if it's just your mic. So let's jump into it. So I know we have many either customers or mutual customers on. So thank you for everyone for taking time out of your Wednesday to jump on. This is the famous slide that's in every single webinar that I do is promise that we're making is we're going to share as much as we can about what we know in our worlds. I would say I'm very quantitative in the world of analytics and data collection. Matt is very much in the world of qualitative data. And we're going to share as much as we can know and hopefully spur some good ideas for everyone on here. So the agenda, like I mentioned, do a quick intro. If you don't know who we are, then we'll jump into some attribution frustrations, options for marketers, and then examples of combining some of this qualitative and quantitative data. Oh man, Alex, you're the question, how to make better decisions with ads management when reporting is so often Facebook Ads Manager. We would be a billionaire if we could answer that like to the T. We'll do our best. All right. So again, how is this going to be a little bit different? We're going to set the expectation a little bit early, but then we're going to get into some real life examples. So I'm going to have analytics pulled up, and we'll have Matt will have his tool pulled up and Tag Manager and different ways that we can send data and a few examples of how to report back on that. So about me, I didn't have time to change this picture. I have two boys. So I've been in e-commerce for almost 14 or 15 years now. Founded Elevar about 4.5 years ago. We actually didn't start as data collection. We started automating insights, and then we realized that no one wanted insights from dirty data. So we went down the path of, okay, how do we ensure that our customers have clean, accurate data as much as we can? I'm very grateful that we work with many amazing brands, many that are on here supporting, which we really appreciate and appreciative of having that support. We work with brands across really all verticals and primarily all of Shopify. My personal passion, I love data, love analytics. I use the example of like, if I'm going downstairs to get groceries, I'm figuring out like what's the least amount of time that I can spend of like pulling up the groceries, getting them unpacked, et cetera. I do have two boys. I have a 1.5-year-old and 2.5-year-old. So my life's changed in the last 3 years, but very grateful to have them and they're healthy. And I live in Charleston, South Carolina, where some of us are here as well. Matt, kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. My name is Matt Barr. Similar, kind of funny enough, similar backstory to Brad. I've been in e-commerce for a little less, about 11 years. We founded EnquireLabs 3 years ago. Again, work with a ton of amazing direct-to-consumer brands, Allbirds, Outdoor Voices, Parade, kind of you name it. Also have, funny enough, like I work more in the qualitative space, but definitely more lean on the analytics, quantitative side of things. Some of you may have saw I started like a SQL blog during the height of the pandemic last year, which was like just a good introduction into kind of blogging on that side. And yeah, I'm located in New York and have been since 2010.
Awesome. Well, I am going to, I had to stop the screen share so I can get my notes up. So get that back up for everybody. Let's see here. One sec. All right, I don't want to trying to hide everything, so don't give too much away what we have in the background here. Okay, so just started screen share. Can everyone should see the About Matt. So a little bit about Elevar and what we do. Again, specialize in data analysis and tagging, really focused on marketing, tagging, analytics. We are official Shopify Plus partners, official Facebook marketing partners with a tech program. Really what we do boils down to three things: establishing a trustworthy data foundation. As we've transitioned to our server-side tagging, is now we actually can have that stamp of promising 95% plus conversion tracking accuracy via server-side tagging. And then ultimately, we realize that the data foundation is that's the ends of the means of driving insights for many of you, driving insights from your data, whether it's marketing attribution or on-site conversion optimization. So that's really the last stage for us, is event-based tracking. And really the main part that we do is we take all those different data. So we think about customer attributes, whether it's they've defined like their first name, last name, email, or it's inferred like their location or IP address or user agent, consent mode, et cetera. Those are all pulled into our product, our software, and then that's what we use to map the different channels. So every channel has different requirements, and especially when we get into the world of privacy, there's all different ways to implement different privacy rules and tracking, and that's going to continue to grow in complexity. And then ultimately, it's that layer of, okay, when an integration does break, how do we know about that? Now that we've transitioned into server-side tracking with some of our first channels, now we're able to actually monitor success rates. So we know Facebook received X number of conversions, and we can compare that to Shopify. That's the world that we live in, and it's going to continue to get a little bit tricky over the next year and a half, as tracking continues to be a big burden on all of us on here on this call. Matt, over to you.
Awesome. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we started EnquireLabs back in May 2018. And the initial use case, kind of the reason for this call as well, is really around attribution. You'll see on the next slide is actually the reason why we built this for this next brand, but they were having trouble understanding where their conversions were coming from. We're relying on the Facebook pixel, which is representing about 40% of their volume, but the other 60%, it was like, how are we doing like 7 figures in revenue without really knowing which levers to turn? So that's kind of how we were born. At the time, there was really no easy way to add a survey question post-purchase on this page that tied back the order data. The only way previously was to like drop a Google form or use SurveyMonkey post-purchase via email. So that's kind of how we got started. Fast forward to today, we work with about 1,500 brands and serve just under, it's kind of the summer months, we're serving about 10 million surveys a month at this point. And Brad, if you just want to go back one slide. Yep. So one of the things you'll hear me highlight during this call is really just this whole concept of direct from consumer. Much of our world we live in is direct to consumer. And we've really started to use kind of the opposite of that, which is how do you create this kind of flywheel effect where, yes, you're selling to your customers, but how do you actually capture the data back from them? It's the whole value of direct to consumer. And kind of where we're moving with the product, focused on attribution, and now moving into additional use cases, segmentation, conversion rate optimization, just general product research. This is more like the qualitative side of the equation. And our larger vision, again, is just to operationalize survey and question data. We view the type of data we're collecting to be quite analogous to data that you capture like through Elevar, like GA type data that's always on and just feeding into your analytics stack. And if you just go to the next slide. So this is just to give you a little preview of kind of our larger mission of what we're doing. So we have this functionality called Question Stream that's in beta right now for about half of our customers. And it allows you to create multiple questions that get asked to customers over time. So this is the kind of just mental model or representation that we're going to be really kind of harping on in our evolution from simple post-purchase survey application to more of a data collection mechanism that enriches every tool you're working with and really provides that kind of, it's marketing lingo, but like 360-degree view of that customer through a lot of these kind of human in the loop data points.
Yep. Cool. So let's jump into it. We're going to start with the problems that, again, all of you are facing and what we've tried to summarize into the top 3. Before we get into the problems, I just want to do a quick nomenclature jargon, as it's very heavy and thick these days. So a client, so if you hear me say the word client or browser versus server-side tracking, for the most part, a client, you can just think browser. So browser that you're viewing here and on this Zoom webinar. Server side is when data is collected outside of the browser. So the easiest example here is taking Shopify data or data from Shopify servers and then sending that directly to the Facebook conversion API. So the data is being ultimately sent, so that there still needs to be that pipeline. In most cases, we're sending data to, in this case, Shopify, and they're collecting it. Think about an order or transaction. But then the point of getting the data from point A to point B happens server side, so typically through APIs. And APIs, they're just much more stable than a browser. They're not impacted by Chrome extensions and ad blockers and tracking constraints that we deal with today. The other one that you'll hear probably me, both of us pipe in on will be like just saying the phrase iOS or ITP, which was really pre-iOS, the big iOS change. And generally, just to generalize this statement, it's browser-led constraints. So it's constraining the way that we're able to collect data and ultimately pipe that to different channels. And then zero party versus first party versus third party. Zero party data, like Matt was explaining, so direct from consumer. So this is where they're willingly providing the data through surveys, quizzes, et cetera. First party is generated by your own server or domain. So think Shopify or a server-side container that you can do certain things with. And third party data is generated by external sources. So that's just a general overview on nomenclature. All right, I think we had one question. So if anybody raises their hand and you have a question, feel free to just drop that into the Q&A, and that'll be the best way for us to grab any questions you have as we go through this. All right, so the attribution toolkit. Matt, you want to take everyone through this?
Yeah, totally. So we added this slide really just to give a more holistic view of ways to measure marketing success. So during kind of the age, which is quasi now too, where you could really just spend money on Facebook, and that was really the only thing you really needed to optimize was that Facebook ROAS. Brad and I were joking before the call. It's almost like we're seeing the resurgence of the return of Google Analytics, just because the ability to just track via Facebook's kind of client-side pixel is just getting more and more difficult. So just wanted to highlight some of these things. There's definitely more options here, but client-side pixel tracking, that was kind of the original Facebook way of measuring conversions. Server-side tracking, that's obviously what Elevar is really focusing on now and does a great job there. UTM analysis, that's really looking at kind of last click, first click, landing pages, et cetera. We'll definitely touch upon that in a little bit. Attribution surveys, it's simply how did you hear about us, when did you hear about us type surveys. That's exactly what we do at EnquireLabs. Regression analysis, this is really just understanding correlation between two things. Let's say you do a very large ad spend on a new platform and just measuring, hey, we did a large ad spend, did our sales increase, yes or no? It's just simply running a regression on that data. It's similar to incrementality testing, which is definitely getting more and more popular. A lot of that is using holdout type mechanisms to spend during a certain time, then reduce the spend and see if sales drop to really understand the correlation. Media mix modeling, I've yet to see this implemented in a cost-effective way for a brand that's, say, under $100 million. So not something that's super simple to do for smaller brands. But media mix modeling, it literally just looks at all of your channels and runs similar regressions, kind of linear, nonlinear, on top of them to see correlations of spend differentiation. And then the last one is just discount code analysis. It's similar to landing page analysis. I only brought it in here because it's getting more and more popular. We see that pretty often with podcasts, definitely with channels like TikTok that are harder to measure. It's just a more kind of definitive way to measure success. But again, not everyone's using the discount code and they all have their faults. So just kind of giving a large overview of these things. And yeah, if anyone wants to chat on any of these after, like feel free to ping us. I'm always down to chat different ways to measure this stuff.
Good stuff. All right, challenge number one, lack of top of funnel data. So there's a couple, well, there's many more than two, but the main one we'll see here in the next screen is going to be Google Analytics historically has been too heavy on non-paid sources, so organic or direct or referral, et cetera. And that ultimately leads to a lack of confidence in where to spend. And this has really been exacerbated with the Facebook, iOS, and as Alex noted, just how to make better decisions when ads manager, when most everyone has a bulk of their spend in Facebook is no longer reliable. And Matt, do you want to jump into this one, give a little more context?
Yeah, this is hopefully everyone's familiar with this page, but it's the kind of source medium page within Google Analytics. And this page right here is literally the reason why we suggested to Kara to go at a post-purchase survey. So direct and organic, again, direct kind of black hole into where these customers are coming from. Organic, the majority of brands, I'd say the vast majority of brands, a lot of that organic traffic is going to be branded. So it's not really driving kind of new user searching, it's really bottom of funnel traffic. And then Google CPC, again, similar to organic, like very hard to make non-brand work until you have scale. So this was kind of, we included this slide because it's difficult to make decisions looking at kind of this data, which represents, call it 60-65% of the conversions on this site. And this is the issue that everyone's facing. Like these paths to purchase just aren't linear. Being able to track from a last click perspective isn't going to really get you anywhere.
Yep. Challenge number 2, post iOS. Hopefully there isn't too many 4-letter words being thrown away. With this screenshot, we won't go too deep into this. We all know what's going on, but Facebook attribution chaos and ads manager. I can tell you from just being in my seat and as in our company, it's almost like 50-50, where 50% of customers, like everything just got cut in half essentially as soon as everything started to roll out in full force in June. And then the other half seemingly, and I'm summarizing a little bit here or a little bit tongue in cheek, but the other half, it's like Facebook is significantly over reporting, where now it's capturing 60, 70, 80% of all conversions, which doesn't feel or seem right. And that's across the spectrum, as those that are using our server side implementation with GTM or fully managed, or using a native Shopify or their own hard coded. So it's all over the place. And the only thing that we've heard second, third hand, more like third hand, in the Facebook group that we're in, or we used to have a Facebook group with other partners in Facebook directly, and then just different emails, is May was when things were going to start to get bad. June was when it was really going to get bad. And then we should start to see some stability in July and August into the fall. That was what we've heard from a few different folks. And that was from Facebook, as their whole internal process of how they've had to rebuild ads manager and everything that we're doing with the changes with Apple. Just a lot of a massive change for them. And unfortunately, everyone's feeling the impact of that. I shared an article a couple of weeks ago on our blog, and just this is essentially a summary. We still get questions from folks on this, and for years, and this is what we would do too, is we would look at, all right, how many Shopify orders did you have yesterday or last 7 days, and how many are in Events Manager, and that we'd always make sure, like, okay, is it 95% ish? If not, then is there an issue? Now it's just that it doesn't happen. It'll never, well, maybe not never, but the way that Events Manager is today, the standard Events Manager that everyone's used to looking at their purchase events, if any events are sent to Facebook, it doesn't matter if it's through the Pixel or conversion API. Everyone, maybe not everyone, but for a lot of people trying the whole offline conversion import, which for the most part hasn't been too successful in long term from what we've heard. But this is, if any of those events are coming from iOS devices, unless the user is opted in, then Facebook is automatically discarding them. And then that transitions into the aggregated events measurement tab, which is confusing still. And Facebook documentation states today that in order for events to appear in the AEM tab, it's going to be delayed. And they're only attributed click conversions. So usually what we would see here, if, okay, 540 divided by 847, so we're 60% or whatever that is of purchases. Now let's go look at the aggregated events measurement, and we should see the remainder of those purchases, add those up, and we should get to close to 847 amount. That doesn't happen either. So there is the back of the napkin way that we don't do it too much, but if someone really wants to look at it, you can go to analytics and look at your percentage of users that are on your iOS device 14.5 or higher. And if it's 35%, then you can assume that the large majority of those are opted out users. So those events would be discarded and not available in Events Manager. So that is a big one where Shopify purchases does not equal Facebook purchases in Events Manager anymore. And then just a few more points on this. Just simple tracking a customer who viewed or clicked an ad is going to become more difficult. We're seeing Google. So when everything first was rolling out, no one really heard anything from Google. Certainly starting to see some significant changes that they are rolling out. Number one, they've released a server-side integration for Google Ads, which Google Ads conversion tracking, which we're testing a few of those to run in parallel just to validate that it works. That is extremely complicated in the technical background behind how that works. They've also they've had it in beta for a long time, but they've released it to everybody is the enhanced conversions. Many of you have probably submitted tickets to us asking, can you get that set up? So that process is a little clunky as well, where you have to submit it, and then there's like a 3 to 5 day window before it actually shows up, and you can add your first name, last name, email, et cetera, to add to your conversion tracking. And it's all around trying to get that match back to the user. And then Matt, I'll let you touch on this last point that you pulled from Branch.
Yeah, this is definitely up for debate too, but Branch looked like the source of the most accurate data. But I think the question is how many people aren't opting in to be tracked. And there's tons of conflicting things. We've seen numbers as high as 40%, lower Branch is saying 25%. I think the question is it's the unknown. So even if you're trying to extrapolate results, like you just can't do it accurately. So hopefully this becomes a bit more clear. We continue to monitor it just to see the total impact. But right now it looks like it's around 25%.
Yep. All right. Last one is, as Matt mentioned, leading a little bit earlier, where we're seeing a higher number, just bigger number of folks that are moving back to GA and realizing I need to get my UTM tracking in order, need to make sure that it makes sense. GA, Google Analytics, if for those that aren't using an attribution tool, there's many that are out there today that can or may or may not help in terms of just answering some of the questions that you have with the Facebook down. But proper UTM tracking, query parameter tracking, even if just industry alone, thinking about UTM tracking is one way, but affiliates and the way that consent mode in Google Ads works, it's like everything is moving back to query-based tracking, and that's how your data foundation is going to need to be able to tie things together. So the original ITP, Internet Intelligent Tracking Prevention or protocol, when they released that 5 or 10 years ago, like the thought process behind that was using query parameter like click base. You got to tie this click ID to the purchase click ID, and you have to tie that together post purchase, and yada yada yada. That seems to be coming to reality as just the how to suppress all of the tracking suppressions happening, whether it's GDPR, browsers, iOS, etc. So with that, with Google Analytics, this is obviously very, very much in our world. We have those base issues that'll happen with just direct traffic, and like Matt mentioned, but there's a lot of these hidden nuances that we have seen grown over the last year or two. So just browsers by default blocking tracking. So if you are using Firefox and you're in their enhanced security mode, which is super easy to enable, that blocks all GA requests and really any tracker requests that you have running through your normal format of you have the native integration on with Shopify or scripts, just like the standard third-party scripts set up hard-coded in the theme or even in GTM. Browser extensions. So these obviously have grown in importance, where Honey and all these other browser extensions, where they're going to detect coupons in a checkout and they just steal attribution. That's an easy one. You're going to see you are seeing the rise in affiliates in your source medium reports, and that's stealing from all of your majority of your paid sources. Ghost referrals, we're tracking breaks mid-session. Easy one here that we see all the time. We did not realize how big of an issue this was for many, is the variant redirect issue. So this one, essentially, you have an inbound link to a product page, whether it's Google or Facebook, doesn't matter. It has a variant in the URL with the UTMs. comes to the site, the variant URL changes because maybe you're forcing a default variant. UTMs are dropped before Google Analytics actually loads on site. So what ends up happening, if it's coming from paid search, that paid search click into the site actually falls back to organic, or if it's coming from Facebook, if you're lucky, it'll fall back to Facebook referral. Otherwise, it would be a direct. That's a big one. Seen massive changes when we've implemented some server-side tracking for customers that had that issue. Offsite payments and ad blockers. Ad blockers is another one. Last year, we quantified with a few customers, set up ad blocker tracking to quantify it. And we had some that were 15, 16, 70%, depending on the day, of their users that had ad blockers enabled. So what can you do? Before we get into the way we can potentially not solve, but address some of these challenges and get into the screen share and demo time, just want to do a quick pause to see if there are any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat if you have any on anything we've gone through so far. Okay, so option number one. So combining qualitative and quantitative data, obviously that was the title of this webinar. So this is our direct from the consumer. So our surveys, post-purchase surveys in this example, and then combining that with analytics. And again, primarily Google Analytics, which we're going to show today. And why collect both types of data? Matt, why don't you share your knowledge on the why behind this?
Yeah, totally. So the first point, data capture tools. And this is also refers to like Facebook's pixel. No one's really incentivized to be accurate against each other. So Facebook obviously wants to claim that they drove as many sales as humanly possible, essentially top, bottom of funnel. So a lot of like example here is like a lot of your word of mouth is probably captured as Facebook top of funnel traffic, because as everyone knows, you talk about something, you Google it, then you get a Facebook ad, and Facebook's going to claim that they were the reason that person that you made that sale. So that's just like the first kind of mental model or thing to continue thinking about is, unless you're utilizing a third party, all of these platforms want to claim credit. So the two other points is just having unbiased parties collect the data, as I just mentioned, and routing it will inform cleaner and more trustworthy insights. So it's getting someone like Brad and his team, making sure that you're continuously tracking and collecting accurate data. And then the second point is really just the qualitative side of things. How do you fill those dark spots, whether it's direct traffic or top of funnel traffic, to make more actionable insights from the quantitative side of things?
Yep. So the next one, Matt, get creative with post-purchase surveys.
Yeah, so just wanted to highlight some options here. I think it's still about 70% of our total volumes, some form of how did you hear about us type questions. But once you utilize that question, you can start to kind of go a little bit deeper. So for how did you hear about us, at least with our platform, you can follow up and ask what we call a response clarification question, which is, hey, heard about you through Facebook, where on Facebook, just to provide some more clarity there. But beyond that simple attribution question, another popular question in the attribution space is like, how long have you heard about your brand name, essentially? And this is definitely one of our favorite questions, because you can always look in GA's kind of time lag screen, which again, every time I've looked at it, it's like most of your customers purchase within a day, which we all know typically isn't accurate. And that's just kind of device hopping and whatnot. So this really allows you to build a base for just understanding how long it takes a customer to convert. And one of the things I want to reiterate there is that Facebook's measuring everything from a specific window, let's say a 7-day click right now. That doesn't mean that customers who maybe saw your ad a month ago via Facebook and then now finally convert. As a marketer, you need to take that into account. So it's not like, hey, if they don't convert within 7 days, it's completely wasted. It's like, no, you're continuing to build awareness and build your brand. So just better understanding that funnel, like let's say the average time someone learns about your brand and converts is say 90 days. Like you might want to start to open up that attribution window and start to analyze things a little bit differently than just kind of a 7-day click or whatever kind of you're optimizing for within Facebook. And then a few other options. These aren't necessarily attribution questions, sort of say, but they can help you kind of inform attribution. So what is the main reason you made your purchase today? It's a very popular one. It'll allow you to just understand a little bit of the why around the purchase. So maybe someone's buying sheets for their bed. Is it because of the price? Is it because of the quality? Is it because of the design, the brand? Just knowing this will allow you then to inform kind of your marketing strategy more top of funnel. It's like, hey, maybe we should talk more about design and quality than we do really about kind of our brand vision, because people don't care as much about it. And then the other two, just what is your age? That's just, again, I don't know if anyone's looked in the audience insights screen of GA over the last year or so, but you used to be able to get age for about like 80-85% of your traffic. I think now that number, and Brad, you can probably correct me, but I think it's about like 15% they're allowing you, just the way privacy, the amount of people who opted in for that. So again, just using your own data collection to understand like, who is my customer? Why are they here? And then finally, that last one, who are they purchasing for? Are we marketing towards people who are buying for themselves, or are they buying as gifts? Like all things that can help, kind of the first two really can help inform an attribution model. And the last three examples here can help you kind of augment how you're thinking about marketing.
Yep. And then number three is going to be improving data collection quality. So there's a couple of different things to talk about here. One is, which we'll see here in a minute, is starting to leverage some of your Shopify data. So leveraging Shopify customer data like LTV, order count. You potentially could send other characteristics like tags on a customer, et cetera. Start sending that data to GA. And we'll see how we can merge that with some of Matt's data through the post-purchase surveys. Number two is maximizing total order match rate percentage. This has been everyone on here likely has either has or currently experiencing a lower percentage of orders in GA compared to Shopify. So the reason behind this, besides the obvious one of just having accurate conversion data in GA, is if we're 20% short, and that could be a significant number of conversions that are coming from paid channels, where if we don't have that, then it makes some of these reports that we're going to go through that we can start blending survey data and make some of those they're just not as useful if we're only comparing 70-80% of conversion data that is primarily direct or referral or affiliate based. So that's another one. Following a strict UTM tagging process. So this one, everyone is subjective. We've probably all seen and tag things different ways all the time. The way, I think this one, and we'll see this as an example here in a minute, but the way that I like to look at this, and this is just my own subjective way, is start with what are the questions that you're trying to answer in reporting. So I'll use two different use cases. One, we had a question from a customer, I've heard it many times, is not post iOS 14 is how can we break down the number of purchases that actually come from Facebook by very basic prospecting versus remarketing, and understand the total order count. So the number of orders, repeat purchasers are coming through prospecting campaigns or vice versa for remarketing. And then there's the flips. So that's one example. The other one, which is a little bit more technology based, has platforms like Magix and RevealBot, and there's likely many others I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, that it's more of that automated ad buying. And so at RevealBot, as an example, they are very heavy on leveraging your ad set ID or other parameters within Facebook, and using that to drive some of their algorithms. So the question is, how can I maximize my value out of my IA bot buying platform that's managing my Facebook ads? It's okay, well, it needs ad set ID, campaign ID, whatever it is, coming from analytics or another tool. So make sure to create your tagging to allow to support for that, versus potentially going the generic route of just using a standard naming convention that isn't really going to have that direct connection with your other tool. So one's very the quantitative question of trying to extract insights that you can't get out of these platforms, like the repeat versus for prospecting. And then there's that the tool based. And then the last one, which is, I think everyone for the most part knows this and does this, but ensuring your marketing channel tracking is uniform across all events. So all of your different channels, they all have the same triggers for purchase events and subscription events and add to carts, et cetera. The maximizing accuracy and use of Google Analytics. So this, again, I think the long and short here is we can improve Google Analytics attribution from where we are today. There is an article I posted on Thursday or Friday last week, and it was showing five examples of pre-post, so pre-server-side GA tracking posts once they got up and running on server-side tracking that we help implement on our platform. And we've been testing this with some of you on here, some not yet, but since February, March, and we've gone through many different iterations. And this is ultimately like the variant redirect URL and some of those other examples of things that were impacting purchase conversion attribution. These are some of the big changes that really bubble up to the top. Paid search. So organic is going to go down if you are using paid search, leveraging paid search. We pretty much always see organic go down, paid search go up. We will also generally see affiliates go down, and then those transactions are redistributed out to different paid channels. And then just the overall lift, it's kind of like the rising tide lifts all boats. So if we're capturing more transactions in GA due to server-side tracking, then those are able to be redistributed out to different channels. So you'll see just a general increase in some of your different paid acquisition channels. But the story here is Google Analytics can be improved, and you do have options to use what we call first touch data from Shopify. So Shopify stores data on an order. I'm sure everyone's probably seen the conversion details on the order. So there's certain data that's available that can be accessed, as well as just your general last touch UTM data when we're able to ultimately route that to Google Analytics. So let's dig in. So we're going to look at just some combinations of Elevar and EnquireLabs. And before I jump into the tag manager and GA, so just wanted to show some visuals of these reports. So this is an example of that Facebook. So just looking at Facebook Facebook paid, and then splitting out between retargeting and prospecting campaigns. Again, this was that how can we create our tags to answer the question of, okay, who are our customers that are purchasing by each campaign type. So this is using that combination of pulling in your Shopify customer order count. And this is actually set on the purchase tag. This is based on the customer ID that lives in Shopify. So it is directly tied to that Shopify customer versus like a cookie or something like that. This is directly tied to that purchase event. So that can be distributed out, and you can analyze that by channel or by campaign or really any dimension.
One thing, Brad, on that previous screen too, just to highlight this, and it's a little bit of a sidebar here, but the campaign naming conventions are super important. And one thing, if you're working with an agency, I've seen agencies use essentially cryptic naming under campaigns. And as a marketer, just being able to audit them very quickly and understanding like top and bottom of funnel, especially with kind of prospecting versus retargeting, is definitely something that I would recommend. So one of the first things I do if I'm auditing an agency, it's usually going in and just making sure that like I, as the marketer, can go in and very clearly understand the type of traffic that's being driven to the site. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight that. I saw that there.
Yeah, it's a good call out. Another pretty basic example here is just looking at paid search. Again, breaking down paid search as a channel. Again, if you have channel groupings like generic versus branded paid search, you can break that down in really any dimension once you start sending this data to GA. And then let's take a look at how we're going to be able to, or how we can combine the survey data with some of the reports that we just saw. So it's actually pretty simple. It's a combination of using some of the data that Matt's already pushing into the data layer, and we'll just show you how that looks in Tag Manager, how we're combining that using some of that Shopify data that comes from the Elevar data layer, and then unique ways that we can push that to GA, Facebook, et cetera. So the examples that we'll talk through a little bit here, and some will have examples, some you'll just have to potentially use your imagination. So one is sending survey data with product data. So since we have product data on that purchase page and we can send that event to GA with a question and answer, we can actually append product data from the data layer. So then you can start breaking down surveys based on product data. Matt, this is squarely in your court here. So maybe add a little bit more color around how, if we're able to slice and dice survey data by product, what could everyone on this, how could they leverage that in their own business?
Yeah, totally. Like the first step here, and kind of what we're highlighting, is just removing the data silos. So you have survey response data in the Enquire platform. You have click data. You also have SKU data if you're using enhanced analytics in GA. So that's kind of square one. It's just, okay, how do we compare these? And then the second is, okay, now you have your top of funnel attribution data through your attribution survey. What sources are driving certain product purchases? So is Facebook driving a specific SKU versus word of mouth? And just that kind of information alone can help you. Okay, now we know that Facebook is driving this SKU as a first purchase or a certain channel. Let's highlight that SKU in our creative, essentially. So it's really just allowing you to combine those data sources and see, at least from a kind of human in the loop, self-reported perspective, what products are driven by which channel.
Yeah, and there's the product IQ. There's an amazing interview with Aman from Ministry of Supply that if anyone on Elevar team is here, if you could post that in the chat from our customer page. I won't spoil all of it, but he actually went into detail on their own product IQ metric and how they leverage that in their business for marketing, for product development, et cetera. Really enlightening. Talks a lot about what Matt is speaking to here with understanding where products are starting to drive either first or repeat purchasers. Just a little bit of a extra tidbit there. All right, a couple other examples. I'm excited to get to show everyone. I'm sure you're like, just show me already. Just show us how it works. So if you have multiple brands on a site, so you can start breaking down survey data by brand. So it's similar to the examples that Matt was talking about. The survey data you can send to Facebook. So if, with audiences, with some of the limitations you have in audiences, now it's very easy to send these question and answers to Facebook to build audiences. Very similar to the way you think about, and we've talked about in the past, at least on Elevar side with quizzes, as people are going through answering quiz question answers, and you push that to Facebook. So same methodology there for post-purchase survey data, and really just unlimited possibilities. So there's one example here. If we have time, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you really want to try to get advanced in Data Studio or other tools, is what you could do if you wanted to try to do that. Get a first touch UTM versus a last touch UTM with your survey data. There's likely other ways to do this, especially if you were pulling data out into BigQuery or potentially other BI tools. But with the Elevar integration, you can set the transactions you send to GA, you can set that to use a first touch UTM if it exists. And then we can attach to the purchase event, which I'll show how to do that. We can attach the last touch UTMs that we have in our data layer. And then while you're doing that, attach the EnquireLabs survey response to the purchase event. And then essentially, whether you're using a combination of custom dimensions or potentially data in GA4 that you pull out, you would have a row-based example of your first touch, last touch, and survey data. The caveat here, it's really not true first touch. It's if people are device bouncing, we're not going to be able to account for that, or Shopify would not be able to account for that. But ultimately, it's you will see some difference. You will see some differences between that first and last touch, similar to like what you'd see in GA with your top conversion paths. All right, so let's take a look at our Matt. I'm actually going to come back to this TikTok report. Actually, let's talk through a TikTok, and then I'll jump over to Tag Manager and Analytics.
Yeah, totally. This is just a simple report pulled out of GA. What we did was we created a customer segment in Google Analytics, and then just built a simple transaction report here. And the one thing I just want to highlight here, and I'm highlighting TikTok really just because the volume of orders attributed to TikTok in our platform is very much a hockey stick. It's definitely a channel I wouldn't be ignoring at this point. And this here allows you just to see, like, how nonlinear and how difficult some of these channels are to track. So we recommend building these out, especially for the harder to track channels in Google Analytics, just to build that kind of marketing mental model around where these conversions are coming from. You're probably more apt to look in Shopify and GA on a daily basis, that source medium screen, but kind of under the covers, or whatever analogy we want to throw in here, it's like not true in the sense of what you're looking at from a path to purchase. So yeah, this page very simply just gives you, okay, where did the customer hear about you? Okay, TikTok, and then where are they ultimately converting from? So yeah.
Cool. All right, so let's jump over into how we can work. So Matt, why don't we, for those that may not be familiar with EnquireLabs, let's just walk through a new question, and then we'll transition over to Tag Manager GA and how we can pull that data out.
Cool. Yeah. So this is the question stream beta. So if you're currently an EnquireLabs user and don't see this question stream tab, just ping us and we can enable it for you. It's replacing that surveys tab. But just to start, create a new question. If we just want to do a single response question to start, we could just do the how did you hear about us as an example. And we won't do it in this just for timing, but you can add follow-ups to these. So if, for influencer, for example, if you wanted to add an open-ended follow-up, like which influencer or whatnot, you can do that there.
Yep.
And then at the bottom of this, the bottom of this page, this is the start of essentially what we call our question engine. So if you're looking to capture survey response data for every customer, essentially progressive profiling, like filling out a customer profile, you're going to want to select all customers until answered. And that just means that we're going to show this question to every customer that you have until they answer it. So if they've already answered this, we'll just move on to the next question. And if they haven't, we'll show this. So it's the default settings there.
Nice. Anything else that you want to talk through here in just a general setup, or any nuances in a setup with multiple questions or multiple answers?
Yeah, the only other nuance on this page is if you scroll down, just the randomization of the responses. So we recommend that you leave that on. This removes, it's called order bias, which essentially means if you're not randomizing them, you're going to have a portion of customers that do select that first option, and you're going to be heavily weighted in that. So that's something that we definitely recommend leaving on, unless you're doing like, how would you rate this 1 to 5 type scale, where it would be confusing.
Yeah. Cool. So I actually want to find this one report. Actually, let's just jump over here. I'm gonna have to I'll pull it up after. Looks like I didn't drop one of the images. So it was, what we'll show here is we're going through the dimension setup in GA. So it's basically this, it can be this same report here where you see your source medium, and you can change out source medium, swap this out for, again, channel, campaign, landing page, whatever, and add a column here for your survey question, answer, and response. So then you basically would have this report, same exact report here with these custom dimensions with LTV in here potentially, and then adding in that additional column for the survey response data. So how this works, so it's depending on how the easiest, if you just want to get something up and running quickly, it's basically one tag. So it is one tag in GTM. And really this data is not really, it's not connected necessarily to Elevar all per se. So anybody could use this, even if you're not using Elevar's data layer on the purchase page. But all we're doing is we are listening for the question. So EnquireLabs push, there's a data layer push that happens on a purchase event or on the purchase page once someone answers one of the questions. So there's a question and response. So the question, how did you hear about us? The answer would be TikTok or influencer. And this is what we recommend doing is not only sending this as an event, so an event action, but also sending this as custom dimensions in GA3. You can do the same thing in the GA4 tags as well. But essentially what this will allow us to do is pull, when we're sending these as custom dimensions as well, is that report we just looked at that was source, campaign, LTV, total order count, total revenue, et cetera, would be able to combine that type of report with this data. So that's where the custom dimensions come in, and I'll show how that works here. So that is the very simple one tag, one trigger. This one trigger happens on the post purchase page, which I have pulled up already here. So this inquire response, this is what, again, is being pushed from EnquireLabs. And you'll see the question, how did you hear about us? And then the response right here. So this is super easy. Anybody can get this up and running today if you wanted to, and just start pushing this data into GA. Now, mapping this to custom dimensions. So inside of your Google Analytics account, under your property, if you go to custom dimensions, there are 4 dimensions here. So we have customer LTV, customer total order count, and then we have our EnquireLabs survey question and answer. So these, I'll talk through the nuance here about hit versus session versus user base. This might be subjective based on what you're looking for or how many questions that you have coming through. But these are the 4 dimensions and the 4 pieces of data that we're talking about combining and merging. So you can pull these out into basic GA reports or Data Studio or anywhere else we might be pulling this from BigQuery as well. So in order to get the purchase event data, so if you are an Elevar customer, pretty simple to append this. So we just need to create those dimensions and then add these to, this is that customer lifetime value. Again, this is Shopify data. This is tied to Google at GetElevar, Brad at GetElevar. When I go through and place an order, I'll show that here in a second. And then a total order count. So this will essentially attach these dimensions. So every time, if I were to go through and place an order a month from now, when we look at this data in analytics, this will continue to increment up. So because it is a user scope dimension, it will continue to increment this up. So that is the purchase setup, and then just the basic EnquireLabs setup for their base tag. Now let's take a look at that product data example. So this is an example of, we are sending, so in this case, we could send the EnquireLabs. So I just have response here, but you can append the question and response into the same event action. And then in the event label here, what we're doing is we're sending product data. So we're sending product ID, product SKU, et cetera. And the way that looks, if we go back to our tags here, oops, not the Facebook, we've got product data. So this can be reformatted. This is just one example. You can just send SKU if you wanted, or just product ID. But in this example, we're sending, we can send product ID, product name, category, price, quantity, et cetera. Again, you can send just brand name, anything that exists, essentially anything that exists in the data layer. If we go back here, just show you the product data. Any of this data that exists with any of your product data, that can all be included as an additional event label that is then pushed in to GA. And if you wanted to get complex and add that as an additional custom dimension, you can do that. And then you can start building out that report. One more I'll show, and then I see a couple questions we have that I'm going to jump into. The last example here is, so the Facebook example. So this is taking everything that we just talked about with the base tag and then the tag with product data. And this is sending a custom event to Facebook. So here we're sending this base survey event and then our survey question and survey answer. And it seems like a very complicated setup. Everyone will get this container. It'll be in our pre-built tag library. We can just download it and just change out your GA ID and your custom dimensions, but all this would be built out. But this is another example of leveraging the data. So if you wanted to send the question and answers to Google Ads or wherever else you wanted to send that, you can do that. You can just configure that in a similar manner here that we have for Facebook. So let me just pause for a second to answer a couple of questions. So this first one, Matt, this is for you. So the question from Alex, in that example of TikTok, were you saying GA was attributing 0 of the purchases to TikTok when the survey was saying all those purchasers started at TikTok?
Yeah, exactly. So that report was before TikTok. I just pulled the date range before TikTok really rolled out their ad manager. So that was a brand that was essentially crushing it on TikTok, I think, before a lot of other brands, using influencers, using their own channel, and kind of pushing virality there. So at that point, yeah, there was literally very little sales being attributed in GA to TikTok.
Cool. And another question here, Matt, I'll let you answer this one. Do you have a recommended site for building dynamic UTMs? So there might be a two-tiered answer for this. One would be the Google Campaign Builder, where you can just drop in your source medium campaign names to build those links. But any other quick tips you have on just managing different UTM, managing UTMs across different channels, campaigns, et cetera?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is it's not simple, and not from creating the UTMs itself. It's just like making sure your entire team and agencies follow a similar syntax. What I would do, and I could probably find one in a second, but I would just Google and look for a Google Sheet UTM template, like UTM Builder, and just make a copy of that and have that as your kind of internal tool for always creating UTM. So anyone on your team, agency, et cetera, just references that for kind of understanding the syntax, and it'll work similar to the UTM Builder within Google. You'll just have it stored in a sheet. But yeah, that's there's definitely a company that, I don't know how large this could be, but there's definitely a company that could be built that is solely used for kind of managing UTMs internally and checking to make sure they're managed correctly. But yeah, right now there's no simple way except doing it manually.
Cool. So two folks have their hands raised for questions, Sherilyn and William. Do you all have, feel free to drop the questions in a chat. I'll give you a minute. I'm actually going to drop in this other screenshot here that I was trying to pull up previously. So Sherilyn, William, do you both have any questions that you wanted to ask? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and that one. Back to GA here. All right, so any questions on custom dimensions and how to create your custom dimensions, set them in your GA event tag. So if you just wanted to start pushing your survey data to GA, this is literally all you'd have to do. Anybody have any questions on how that works? Okay. The next, so the product data, Facebook, again, if you follow really the template that we have here for this first one, you can either ask us if you have questions on how to do that, but it's really easy to take this data and send this. So if you have multiple questions and multiple answers that are coming through, the way that this tag is built in GTM, this inquire question response, this will trigger every time. So if you have 3 questions that people are answering after they complete a purchase, this data would be sent every single time that we go through. And I'm going to go through one test order here after we go through the GA side. So inside of analytics here, we just go to custom reports. We'll just show you how you can go ahead and build this out. So inside your custom report here, you just create your source, drop your source medium, or if you want, like I said, you want to do channel or anything different, you can do that. And then the 2 custom dimensions that we create, so our survey question, survey answer, and then you can get fancy going your LTV, customer LTV, and order count. And then this will give you the count of transactions for that. So this is on a test property. Let's see if we have data coming through here. Okay, so this is an example of that type of report where we have our source medium. So if we just look at row 2 here, I'll zoom in a little bit. So mimicking someone coming in, everyone would love to see IG, paid, Instagram, paid social come through here as much, but mimicking 3 different types of examples here. So we have direct. So someone coming in through direct, and the EnquireLabs survey answer was influencer, and we can see that what their LTV and total customer count was. So that is pretty common. This will be a common example where within some of your direct revenue, you'll be able to hopefully fill in some of those gaps there with the survey answers. And then combining the LTV and customer order count that we have coming through. Number 2, so this is looking at a channel in GA that is attributed from either from Elevar's integration, or if you're just using a native Shopify or a different one. So your attributed channel for a transaction, again, your survey question, survey answer. In this case, you're getting the word of mouth. And again, combining that with your LTV and total order count. And then last but not least, This would be, picture this like an affiliate referral. How did you hear about us? Influencer. In this case, this is our super user, super test user, where 20 total orders purchased with a customer LTV of 623. So you can think about this, expand this out. If you have different questions, different answers, you want to start diving into your product-based breakout. Matt, maybe you could share a little bit about from the marketer and you, how would you leverage this data and take some of this to answer some of those questions that you can't today?
Yeah, I think the exciting thing here, and it's kind of what Enquire doesn't do at the moment too, it's really just comparing survey response data to customer LTV. And the interesting thing about it is we're using GA for something that GA is not natively capturing and just enriching it. So that's definitely the most exciting part. And you could definitely, if you remove that source medium and expand this over time, you'd start to see which channels provide the highest LTV per survey response. And once you start incorporating other types of survey questions, you could start to really kind of see where this goes. It's like, hey, this gender ends up having much higher LTVs or higher AOVs, et cetera. So that's kind of point one. But then point B is really just, and I can't harp on this enough, it's definitely a screen in our application that gets a ton of views daily, is just comparing those source medium kind of last click to what the customer says. So again, just another representation of that, but those would be the two things here I would definitely highlight.
Great. And we have a couple of questions, a couple more screens I'm going to go through here. So one question, Daniel was asking about just what percentage of consumers fill out the survey. Matt, I think your number is 50%. That seems like someone just picking 50%, but is that accurate? 50% of surveys completed?
Yeah, the average, so we work with about 1,500 brands. The average across all brands right now is just over 55%. So we could typically get a brand above 50%. The reasons that it'll drop is if a customer is using kind of a pop-up, like a refer a friend pop-up on that order confirmation page. It takes a while for the survey to load. The question is written in a way that the customer has to kind of infer. So you want to definitely keep the language of the survey as simple as possible. And then the last kind of component is just really brand. Like if your brand has a high engagement with customers, you're going to see a high completion rate. The example I give is we work with a water company who is very kind of, not to use the word loud, but aggressive branding, and their survey response rate is extremely high. And our explanation for it is really just everyone likes to engage with that brand. So those are the things to think about. Like if you're using Enquire and it's sub 50%, like definitely reach out, and we can, like 9 times out of 10, usually get it above 50.
Cool. And then another question from Pete. Any thoughts on Shopify's in-house analytics? I'm not sure where they pull that from, but it seems they do pull some UTM session data. I've been curious whether or not it would be helpful to use for debugging GA. So let's actually just let's go through that real quick, because this directly correlates to our server-side integration for Shopify and GA. If I just look at my orders here. So this conversion summary, this is what I was referring to, where Shopify will provide this data on all orders, where essentially they are going to give you where did the user first visit you from, so that where they first come from, whether it was paid social, paid search, et cetera. They will have that available, and then they'll have where do they ultimately come from to complete a purchase. So that in the different reports that you'll see inside of Shopify, that is where this data is helping drive those reports. Where the nuance is when it comes to Google Analytics is, at least with the native Shopify integration, or if you're just using the GTM web-based integration for purchase data, either on your own or with Elevar, the source medium, so your attribution that you will see inside of analytics is going to essentially be the person came here 19 times, but then on the 20th time they came direct and then completed their order. You would see direct inside of analytics for that particular transaction. What we are enabling with our server-side integration is you have the choice. So if you would prefer to take they first visited from clicking on a paid search ad, and you want that to be what we would send GA instead of direct, you can send that's what you're able to do. And if this doesn't exist for whatever reason on Shopify, but we have UTM data that exists inside the Elevar data layer, which I'll show you what that looks like under our marketing. So this is what we store, and we reset this. So we'll like reset it on new UTMs or Facebook click ID, G click ID. There's a set of 7 or 8 parameters that we do. So this will fall back. So if there's no Shopify attribution data, then we'll fall back and use what's here. And a third fallback, which ultimately stitches the sessions together, is the GA cookie, which exists here. If we look at an order, you'll see this is what our data layer attaches. So we attach the visitor info, so the Facebook UTM source medium, and then our GA cookie, et cetera. So this is what we attach and send to GA. So Shopify's in-house analytics, just in general, what we usually see is your direct traffic in the Shopify reports is typically going to be 40+%, if not more. That's going to vary quite a bit on the brand. Did that help answer your question, Pete? Okay, so we're went a little bit longer than I was anticipating, and I want to be sure I mentioned we would bring folks on if they have any questions, and we've got a few questions. Does anybody want to come on or drop any questions in the Q&A that we haven't gotten to? So we got these couple questions. Don't be shy if you want to hop on or drop any questions in the chat. We'll be happy to take care of those for you. While I'm waiting, we'll give a minute or two to wait for any of those to come through. So what I will do next is bring our slides back up, and we'll go through a couple things to consider here. So we have a bonus. So we are seeing some brands that are starting to go in this direction of just getting GA4 implemented to simply extract that data out. There's a built-in connection to BigQuery. So then BigQuery, you're able to pull it out and do more, not real-time reporting, but do whatever BI or type of deeper data analysis that you want to do. So the benefit of getting the EnquireLabs integration set up with Tag Manager and pushing that to GA3, combining that with some of the data that comes from our data layer, we can also push that to GA4, so then you're able to pull that out if you are leveraging even your own data warehouse or connecting that to other third-party tools. So that's something we are seeing brands start to move towards. Even if you're not using it today, use it 6 months from now, or if you want to use it 6 months from now, you have that data. And then the other one is just to call out here is certainly seeing a significant rise here in privacy. So just looking at our privacy and what's coming down with just data collection as a whole. And for that is let me get to full screen here so everyone can see. So this is something 2022, this is going to become a big problem for many, where everyone is used to dropping in, us included, dropping in your tracking, and then just it's going to work, and we can set up these server-side integrations, and we'll get 100% match rate. What's now happening is, especially in Europe or other states that are starting to crack down on this compliance, is having that flag. So instead of just slapping on OneTrust or other platforms that are just by default, they are going to block everything. If we just look at Google, they launched this early last year, their consent mode. So many of these platforms are now building integrations into their tracking. So you don't need to just chop your conversions off at the knees. So you lose that attribution, which you could gain some of that back with a Matt's platform, but still send conversions. But essentially you don't cookie. So you're not getting around the laws, but Google, obviously they have many lawyers on staff. They've rolled out their consent mode where they're still passing those transactions. It's anonymized. It's not, we won't be able to track it back to Matt, and they're not cooking. So that Matt would not be cookied and put into that pool and then remarketed to or shared with other platforms. This will be a big thing that'll be coming on a pipeline to ensure that, again, once you implement that, your global cookie policy or tracking, and you just wait for people to opt in, most people aren't, and then you lose your conversions, and then you'll have to rely on more of that, the zero party data of word of mouth, people telling you where they came from. So that is something that you'll be seeing more coming out from us. So that's it. Looks like we don't have too many questions. So one question, possible collaborations, best way to connect. Matt, can you just drop your email into the chat? I'll drop mine in there. Now feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, we'll wrap this up. The replay will get sent out. I'll drop a link to the pre-built GTM containers that you can use, and a little guide on how to set up the EnquireLabs tracking. And yeah, looking forward to, hopefully this is helpful. Feedback, good or bad, send it our way. And okay, we got a question that came in. So what do you expect? What do you expect to be affected the most since IP data is anonymized in iOS 15? That's a loaded. Matt, do you have any initial thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to affect anything kind of that we've been chatting about during this call. It's going to affect, it's a bigger problem for, I'd say like the DMPs, the LiveRamp and whatnot, who use IP address a lot to build kind of just as an identifier. So yeah, I don't think it would affect anything too much on this call, but yeah, once you start moving up and your marketing budget really increases, like I'm sure they're, yeah. Long story short is we've been chatting with them and Distillery and a couple other audience targeting who want to start ingesting zero-party data because they're very well aware they're going to start losing some of these identifiers.
Cool. All right, Alex, you're bringing you on. Should be unmuted.
Hey, Brad, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you guys very much for doing this webinar. It's super helpful. This is a question. I was wondering if you have any theory as to why you said in the beginning of the presentation that you've seen with accounts that some are drastically over reporting in Facebook ads specifically, and some are drastically under reporting. A theory as to why that's occurring, why some are drastically under and some are drastically over, because with performance in Facebook, it's somewhat based on the reporting. So it seems like you're better off to force it to drastically over report than under report. And if there's any way to force it to do that.
Yeah. I can answer the last part of that, is if there's any way to force the over reporting. I don't know if this is still a quote unquote hack or if they've shut this down. I think they may have shut it down with some of the changes that they've made, but importing conversions through your offline conversions. So that was something that folks were trying back in April, May, and a little bit in June. We would hear a lot of duplicate conversions. So you'd have to adjust for that. But Matt, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on if you are hearing or seeing any Facebook accounts that are significantly over reporting. So taking credit for 60, 70, 80% of conversions. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't see too many that are over reporting, to be honest. And I think the difficulty here is obviously there's no definitive way to know exactly what portion of users kind of opted in and opted out from the conversion side of things. So we're definitely seeing more brands utilize GA to reconcile. So what you could do, at least to understand where your base is look at the portion of customers who I'd use GA's attribution modeling tool and just look at first click and last click over the last, call it, year or so, and understand the portion of customers who are coming from Facebook, and then compare that to today and see if there's a large variance. That's probably where I would start. And that'll start to show you if things are holding constant there and your ad spend hasn't been changing, then you're probably still on a similar track pre all of these updates. So that's where I would check. As far as like over reporting and under reporting, I think it's just very difficult to know exactly why that's happening. Yep.
Great. Thank you both.
Yeah, and Alex, just from my side, I really don't have an answer to it. I would say if subjectively, it feels like it happens more on third-party payments. So like not that it's a cart hook or Zipify or Recharge or other, but just the ones that I've looked at, that have had over reporting, it seems to be that's been one that stands out on the top of my mind. But again, I don't have any true data to back that up per se.
Okay, got it.
Um,
All right, so we have, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say one last thing to touch upon too, just as we're talking about some of these things, is if anyone, I know headless is a super popular topic right now, and I know Brad and his team do a very good job at making sure that GA and everything's reporting accurately when you're on a headless site. People that aren't using Elevar, and this isn't a pitch for Elevar, it's just anecdotally, like I've been contacted maybe a dozen times in the last 6 months of people whose GA is wildly underreporting when they're on a headless site. So something to think about if anyone on the call is thinking about going headless, like make sure that you have not just a front end engineer who can read the kind of GA docs for a headless site, but someone who actually understands the nuance of this. Just because, yeah, obviously you can't just add the data back in. So you want to make sure you're tracking everything correct. So just a kind of comment on headless, I was going to add before.
Yep. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of that for the last 2 or 3 years. All right, Alex, any other questions that we can help you out with?
I had another one, but I've blanked on it now.
Okay, we'll just we can bring it back on. I see a couple more questions here that we'll again, just let me know, chat, or just drop in the chat, Alex. We can unmute you again. Okay, so the next question we have, because Facebook use model for data attribution, model equals guess. Matt, do you see that question?
Yeah, I think it's just poking fun at Facebook has their own attribution model. So they're assuming and this is a good point. It is a very good point. When you see a conversion in Facebook, I'd argue, and I actually don't know if this is 100% correct, but I would argue that there's some probabilistic model behind that being a conversion, and it might not be, hey, this person purchased, but like our model predicts that whatever 99% of the times this would be a purchase, but it might not actually be a purchase. So that's a really good point. Just something to think about. It's not kind of a one-to-one correlation there.
Yeah. Good question. Another question on touching on the announcement that Shopify has deprecated visit data. Unsure what that means for future conversion reporting in Shopify. So I think in general, if we just look at GA4 as an example of this, GA4 they'll continue to improve it, but it's very much a build and manage your own analytics stack. So if we just think about the GA cookie ID, which has been their user identifier forever, I think that is unfortunately what we're seeing the industry go is, you as a brand, you are going to have to create more, you'll have more responsibility around managing your data collection, where even a year ago, just dropping in your analytics ID into Shopify and everything is just going to report, 95% and everything works fine or good enough. I think that's going to continue to go away, where we'll all be forced to have to build essentially our own analytics tracking. The GA4s and GTMs and other tools out there, they're going to be out there to help, but it won't be the 1 or 2 minute, like click this button and it's up and running. So for example, what I mean by that, it could be creating your own unique identifiers that have to be tracked, doing more post-purchase reconciliation of data. So there's a lot to unpack, and I think with Shopify is all the platforms that we're seeing, unfortunately it's going to make the days of just popping in a GA and analyzing, if you don't have your stack set up and managed and monitored, like quality monitored and enriched, then